There is no industry more in flux than media. Every week there's a new streaming service, there's a new takeover, there's a new daily podcast launching. So in this episode of Download the Show, we're going to break down what the media is going to look like in the next few years. We're going to go with audio, we're going to go with video, but we're going to start with written journalism. I'm joined by the editor of Mashable Australia, Caitlin Welsh, and in our Melbourne studios from the startup inkl is Gautam Mishra. Welcome back to Download the Show.
Thanks, Mark.
I want to know, what does written journalism look like in like the next 3 years?
Look, I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think it's going to get supplanted by audio or video in the same way that SMS and text messaging hasn't, gone by the wayside because of video or audio messaging. There are a lot of topics and a lot of coverage that's inherently just more efficient, just to scan through a quick article rather than having to sit through, 2, 3, 5 minute audio video clip. And so I don't think it's going anywhere, but I do think there's going to be differences in how and where it's delivered. One area that we're seeing is very interesting is the notification screen. There are some apps that, quite frankly, are quite indiscriminate and just drive people crazy with too many notifications. And you look at the notification coming through and you say, well, why on earth are you sending me this? It's not breaking news. It's not relevant to me. And it's the middle of the night. So, but there are other publications like The Economist, for instance, that's doing a really interesting experiment where they send you at 6:15 in the morning, they send you about 8 notifications and its entire view of the day's news, the top stories, all there right on your lock screen. So, if you think about digital sort of home delivery of the news, if you will, there are new destinations where the news is appearing, and that might be in, a new social media channel. It could be on a lock screen. It could be in a widget on your phone. And so I think the delivery point and the delivery mechanism will change. With that mechanism, we're also seeing changes in the format. So CNN, for instance, now sends out these quite long notifications where an individual notification might be 300 odd words, and it's essentially an article stub.
So is that stub or the headline or whatever bite-sized part going to become more important than the article, or is that a taste test to see if you actually want to click on the article and get the rest of the information?
Because I think that's part of the issue with written journalism at the moment anyway, Caitlin, which is that people will read a headline, they'll read a tweet, and so often they don't extend any further. Fast forward for me in the next couple of years, what do you think changes about your business? Because this is your bread and butter.
It is. And the headline is obviously so important for us. And we want people to read the article and get all of the information, but some people will only read the headline. And so there's always that tension between how much information you want to get in there. I have a really interesting sort of like a concertina format where you can get the short version or you can expand it out into the long version.
Obviously, we all enjoy a well-written long article when we eventually find the time to get to it. But there are all these interesting sort of permutations that we're looking at now for how to do that. And of course, another example of that would be sort of what I think Vox, a US service, launched with, which is this idea of explainer journalism, although they've sort of kind of moved a bit beyond that. Are there different forms of written journalism that have been crafted for the digital age that work really well, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think the explainers are a fantastic idea, and they really, I think, were onto something pretty early there. And we've seen a lot of other publishers getting into that as well. And I think those explainers are really useful. The problem is exactly what you said. You get to it when you have the time. And in a world where you have so many different media options and so little time, you may never get to it, which is why I think a lot of the experimentation we're discussing around the shorter form of the written word is really important. There was one statistic that said 85% of the discussion around news on Twitter is held around content that's never actually clicked on. So, and it's completely unsurprising if you look at the quality of some of that conversation.
People
right?
do not read that. So many people do not read past the headlines. You can pour, an hour, a couple of hours, or a day, or several days into an article, and people will just comment on the headline, and they don't read past it to get what's in there.
Yeah.
The continued appetite for explainer journalism is partially because people do want that rapid understanding. They want to be across it. They are time poor, and not everybody has time for a podcast or a video or whatever. But also, there's just the SEO element to it. People don't search using keywords. They ask questions. And the really savvy media organisations are now using that to just answer the question.
Yeah.
People will
I should just point out for people that don't know, SEO is search engine optimization, which is basically gaming Google, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and so because people are just asking those questions of Google, they're saying, what does impeachment mean? Something like that. And they're not going impeachment meaning. They're asking questions in real English.
There is another thing happening as well where there's an increasing level of specialization in most areas. So whether you're talking about the details of impeachment or whether you're talking about the Bloomberg story about the Chinese hacking the motherboards of servers in Apple and Amazon, most people don't actually have enough context or enough understanding of what's going on. And so it's really important to have a source or an explainer that can actually give you chapter and verse on it.
One of the things we've been focusing on in the conversation around written is the lack of time. But at the same time, you're seeing this explosion of, I guess, what I'm going to call lean back journalism, which is my stupid term for podcasts, where people have stories now that extend over 8, 7, 9, way too many episodes. So what does it say to you, Caitlin, that, at the same time as attention span for writing may in fact be shrinking, there's this explosion in long-form, slightly contemplative audio journalism? What do you think that says about our consumption habits?
People like the variety of the different pacing and, sometimes you just want, the 15-second bite telling you the headlines. And sometimes if something is interesting enough, and this is the mark of a good journalist, is knowing when something is interesting enough to need 9 episodes and not 15 seconds.
Totally.
And when it works because they've made that story selection well. I don't think it says anything necessarily about the audience except that people like a good story.
There is lots more of this. A whole show dedicated to this topic right now on the podcast of Download This Show. All you need to do is go to wherever you get podcasts and there'll be 27 minutes and 30 seconds of us. We'll see you there. Bye.